disruption, if you will, is actually, as we're going into lunch, I'll tell you a little bit of a spy story, because I think we need something to be a little bit lively. Our story on the Dream Chaser goes back quite a long ways. I would probably say the first time that this really came to my attention was the movie many of us have seen, 2001: A Space Odyssey. That movie actually had its origins in a book that Stanley Kubrick found that was written by Arthur Clarke, originally a short story written in 1948. And in 1948, Clarke was imagining a time where there would be a space station and a plane that could go to that space station. And this image you see here is an image from the movie of a winged space vehicle that was going to a commercial space station. Anyone know who was operating that space plane? Pan Am, which at the time the movie was made was the #1 company in the world, believe it or not. So talk about disruption. But our story for the Dream Chaser vehicle actually goes back to the Soviet Union, something called the Bor 4. And it was a really fascinating story. And at one point in time, an Australian spy plane was flying over the South Pacific and saw a Russian trawler picking something up out of the water. It flew over at a very low altitude, took 30 pictures or so, and those pictures then came back. It was this picture you see in the upper right-hand corner, one of those pictures, of this vehicle that was floating around in the water and it was being hauled onto this boat that no one had ever seen before. The Australian plane sent the pictures to the Australian government. They didn't know what it was. They sent the pictures to the American government and the CIA and other agencies. They didn't know what it was. They sent it to NASA. NASA said, it's not ours. We don't know what it is. And then the American government, in its wisdom at that point in time, said, we don't know what it is, but we want one. So from that picture and from a lot of work that was being done, the US government then reverse engineered a version of this vehicle, which became known as the HL-20. At the same time, the Soviets were very effectively spying on our space shuttle program, some of you may know, and they actually were able to get the entire set of plans for that space shuttle, and they built one, which you can now go visit if you go to Russia. It's in a big hangar, and it's almost an identical copy of the US version. NASA then turned this into something called the HL-20 in the 1980s and 90s, which was a really interesting vehicle. It was meant to be, at one point in time, the lifeboat for the space station. It could take 10 people down. At one point, we were going to have 10 people up on the space station. It was engineered by Rockwell and Lockheed. Did a really great job. If some of you know the movie Hidden Figures, Katherine Johnson was actually involved with this vehicle and helped design it. And a lot of work went into it. The work went into it for about 10 years. And then somewhere in the 90s, for a variety of reasons, budget, and we weren't going to have 10 people on a space station, this vehicle was put aside and frankly forgotten and buried, as a lot of aviation programs are. You just have to walk through this museum and you'll see some of them. We came along in 2004. 2004 was a big year. It was the year we were a part of the team that won the X Prize, the first Space X Prize. And although we've heard different points of view, I would maintain that's probably where the modern day commercial space industry started during that period of time. We had been founded and started doing some work on rocket engines and some other things. SpaceX was founded at that time. A small group of us got together and created what became known as the Commercial Space Flight Federation, now representing about 80 different companies. And a lot of energy went into starting up of companies during that period of time, one of which was ours. And we made a bet. We had about 30 people in a garage in San Diego. And we looked at it and said, we made a bet that the space shuttle at some point in time was going to go away. And what would we do? At that point in time, there was not a commercial space program. There was no program with NASA to fund anything. And in doing that, what we said was, well, we don't really have the money or the energy or the ability to go start from scratch. What else is out there? So we went searching, and we found this program called the HL-20. It was buried in a lot of NASA documentation, and it was actually in a place called Langley, Virginia. I went out to Langley, met the people who ran the center at that point in time, and asked if we could borrow it. And they said, well, we don't know. It's about to be destroyed. It was on a destroy list for NASA at that point. So the only way you could get it is if you go talk to a NASA administrator who has the ability to help you do this. So I went up and talked to Mike Griffin, who was just becoming NASA administrator, at a 15-minute meeting that turned into 3 hours. And at the end of the 3 hours, we basically were able to license out and start working on this vehicle. And it was a fascinating process because we wound up getting lots of documentation from this period of 80s and 90s and really started looking through it. We were then able to take that and over a period of years turn it into the next generation, we think, Shuttle 2.0 flying space vehicle. This is our latest test vehicle, which is fully built, full design, full size vehicle out in flight testing right now out in Mojave at Edwards Air Force Base. And that period of time that came from where did we get the courage, if you will, or the ability to think about taking something that had been buried and turning it into a vehicle that could be flown at a time where there was no commercial space program, there was no funding. NASA didn't actually start funding us until 2010 in a partnership. We spent the first 5 years of our life doing this on our own. And it's a fascinating journey to be able to take that. And we are very much, this is a to-scale picture, between our Dream Chaser and the Space Shuttle. But none of what we did really was, from a pure point of view, an original design. It went back to designs of people from the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, all the shuttle work that was able to be done. One of the interesting things about this picture, although there's an obvious size difference, we have just about as much pressurized space inside for people as the Space Shuttle did. The Space Shuttle was designed to do many things. It was designed to bring up huge pieces of cargo to space and then bring up people, and it was designed to be basically everything for everyone. What we now see now is a divergence of being able to take critical cargo and people up in one way and be able to take massive amounts of cargo up in a different way. And we call our vehicle the Space Utility Vehicle as a result of that. The world comes in really big circles, and in this disruption, we see a lot of things. As I mentioned, we're testing in a place called the Edwards Air Force Base, now called the Armstrong Flight Research Center. And it is a historic place. If any of you have seen The Right Stuff, that's where we broke the sound barrier. That's where the Space Shuttle was first tested. As you see here, this is a Space Shuttle in the hangar that was built for it up in Edwards and what was then known as Dryden. We are now being housed in the same hangar. NASA was really very kind to us to open it up. It's a historical place. And some 40 years later, as we see this story progress, we now become the next generation, the next vehicle that's going to be doing this type of work in this kind of fashion. And it is all about passing the torch. While we can disrupt, and we do disrupt, we can't forget that what we do is actually something that is benefited by all the work that has been done before us. We've been fortunate to be able to take this vehicle and win, as many of you know, a NASA commercial cargo contract. It's multi-billion-dollar, decade-long kind of contract that will enable us to service the space station and do a significant amount of other work in space. But the core of being a commercial space company is not the fact that you're commercial. Every business, Lockheed, Boeing, every company that's ever worked, we're sitting in a Boeing hangar. From the day that Boeing started with his first seaplane over here on the lake, he was a commercial company. We all are. The difference is in my view, is the ownership of the vehicle. We own the vehicle, we own all the IP behind it, and NASA's buying a service. Because of that, we can reach out and start doing many other things. We have now announced a space program with the United Nations, the first ever mission for the United Nations. And this mission will take up 25 countries with us on their first visit to space. The UN Space Agency has now 84 countries that are part of it, most of which have never been to space. So we went to the UN because we now own a spaceship and a space system and said, why don't we do a mission together? And what was thought to be 3 or 4 or 5 years of work trying to get something through the UN got through in about 8 months. And the idea is that we're going to be able to take 25 emerging space countries with experiments on a long duration mission in space and bring them back home. Recently, we then took the next step in this disruption, and we were awarded a contract to be one of the companies to do a design and build of the next generation space station called the Gateway. And this project is now underway in Colorado. We will be building a full-scale ground prototype. And if you think about the journey that we were making, journey from back when Arthur Clarke in 1948 said someday there will be a commercial space plane going to a commercial space station, we now find ourselves in that position. And this journey that we've taken in our company has taken us now to 7 of the 9 planets. We've been on multiple missions to Mars, multiple missions to many planets, and have in total now done 450 space missions from that place of starting with just this dream of saying we can do something very different. And we find ourselves in the position of being able to say that we are now a company that is both building that space plane that could fly to orbit and helping to build the space station Gateway that we can fly to. which, if you think about it, science fiction has now become science fact many years later. I like to end with my favorite entrepreneur, Gandhi. Not many people see him that way, but I have had this saying in my office since I started being a space entrepreneur. And I think it applies to virtually everything we've heard today. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And I don't think you can say it any simpler than that. Everything that I've ever done in this industry, first they looked at it and said, why are you bothering? You're going to build a space shuttle with 30 people? Then they fight you, then they laugh, and then at the end of the day, you wind up winning. So I want to thank you very much for doing that. And as we do this, and this theme for today, dreams don't have an expiration date. And I hope those who are out there that are starting their businesses can understand that it is possible to change the world in this industry. It is possible to do it, to be successful, to be profitable, and to build a big business out of it. Thank you very much.
We just have time for a couple of questions, and it's lovely that Arthur Clarke is with us in so many presentations today. But I need to ask, why should a spaceship have wings?
Because birds do.
They're not very orbital.
No, but they fly really well.
I was just thinking, I mean,
in all seriousness, one of the things that's most important is not just being able to go to space, but be able to be reusable, which we're seeing, but be able to come back home in a way that's the least disruptive manner as possible. We come home from the space station, we can leave at breakfast, we're home at dinner, 8 to 10 hours. We come home at less than 2 Gs. We come home to a runway landing just a few miles away from the place we take off. And the idea of doing that is preserving the science. We're not just going to space just to go to space. We're going to do something. And in our view, the ability to bring what we do in space back home in the most benign manner, be it humans who need that or the experiments that we do, allows us to be able to make this happen.
How much more benign is that than a capsule landing?
Well, most capsules return at this point in time 4 to 8 Gs, and as we've seen, the return is either in the steppes of somewhere out in the middle of the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, or Russia, or out in the ocean. And it takes quite a long time for all that work to get back to where it's needing to be.
And channeling Susmita's earlier question, so when does this happen?
We're flight testing now. Our first flight is expected to be in 2020, which is a NASA flight to the space station. We're currently building the orbital vehicle fleet out that's going to be doing this, so it's quite close, and we have contracted for our first launch systems.
And would you imagine building a larger space plane, or is this the only application for space plane technology per se?
The plane can be scaled up or down, to be honest, but we think the place that we are right now...
How small can it be?
Oh, there we go. There's two answers to that. There's how small can you be without disrupting all the work that's been done? And then if you want, what can you do beyond that? So we think there is a version of this vehicle that can be somewhat smaller, 70–80% scaled, and it can be somewhat larger, and maintaining the integrity of all the work that we've done so far. But the missions we have right now, beyond cargo transfer and being able to bring people up, this is a great platform to be able to fix things in space. We can do EVAs or exit the vehicle and go out and do work. We can be a long-term science platform. So from a utility point of view or from a commercial point of view, you want to take your asset and be able to do as much as possible within the same family.
I like the idea of the little ones that you could have, sort of like take the roof down and really have the full experience.
I think I saw that in The Martian. There was a convertible spaceship there.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much indeed.